I thought working at a funeral home would just be another quiet job. But the silence inside Hollow & Sons isn't empty, it listens. There are rules the staff never break after dark, and I learned what happens when you do. Now I understand, some doors are closed for a reason. Greetings, every shadow hides a story. Welcome. Under the bed. It happened 3 years ago, in a small town called Willow Creek, somewhere in northern Illinois. Back then, I was 30, recently divorced, broke, and trying to rebuild my life. I had left Chicago because every street corner reminded me of what I'd lost. I just wanted something quiet, something that would pay the bills and give me a reason to get up in the morning. When I saw the help wanted sign outside Hollow & Sons funeral home, I thought it was a joke. The place looked like a relic from the 1950s, gray stone walls, narrow windows, a faint smell of old flowers even from the outside. But they were hiring, and I didn't have many options. The man who opened the door introduced himself as Harold Hollow, the owner. He was in his late 60s, polite but distant, his voice dry and calm, like someone who spent too long talking to the dead. The interview was short. He barely looked at my resume. "You'll be helping around," he said. "Cleaning, arranging, paperwork. Nothing complicated. We keep things quiet here." I remember asking, half jokingly, "Quiet because of the clients?" He didn't laugh. That was my first sign something about this place wasn't right. The first day was uneventful. The funeral home had 2 main halls, a small chapel, and a basement used for preparation. The air was cold even with the heaters running. My coworkers were few: Linda, a woman in her 50s with a calm but sad expression, and Marcus, the driver. Everyone spoke softly, like there was a rule against raising your voice. By evening, Harold called me into his office. The light was dim, the only sound was the ticking of an old wall clock. "There are a few rules here, Austin," he said. "We don't write them down. We just follow them. The most important one, you never go into the viewing room after 10 p.m. I waited for the punchline, but he just looked at me. "And if you hear anything from inside after that hour," he continued, "you do not respond. You pretend you heard nothing." He must have seen the disbelief on my face, because he added, "It's for your own good." That night, I stayed late to finish some inventory in the back office. Around 9:45, everyone had already left. I remember the silence, thick, unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. At 10:10, the old clock in the hallway chimed once, softly. And then I heard it. From behind the door of the viewing room came a faint tapping. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. I froze. The sound came again, 3 knocks, then a pause. I told myself it was the pipes or maybe the wood settling. But then, beneath the tapping, I heard something else. A whisper. It said my name. It wasn't loud, just a quiet breath, "Austin," like someone standing right on the other side of the door. My throat went dry. I didn't move. Every part of me screamed to leave. But curiosity, that cursed instinct, made me take one step forward. The corridor light flickered once. I stopped. My hand was just inches from the door handle when I remembered Harold's words. "Never go in after 10. Never answer." I whispered, "Hello," before I even realized I had. Instantly, the whisper stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. Then, one single knock, loud, right at ear level. I stumbled back, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. The door handle twitched. Not much, just a tiny, deliberate movement. Someone, or something, was on the other side, pushing from within. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the back office. I locked the door, sat on the floor, and stared at the cracks of light under it, waiting for footsteps, for anything. But nothing came. In the morning, Harold found me sitting by the window, pale and exhausted. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at me and said quietly, "You heard it, didn't you?" I nodded. He sighed. "Then you understand why we have the rules." He left the room without another word. That day, when I walked past the viewing room, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The handle was bent slightly downward, as if someone had gripped it tightly during the night. The funeral home was silent again. Too silent. And for the first time, I realized that silence could be more terrifying than any scream. The second week at Hollow & Sons felt quieter, heavier, like the air inside those walls carried memories that refused to leave. I told myself that what I'd heard that first night was stress, fatigue, maybe even the building settling. But a part of me knew better. The echo of that whisper, my name drawn out like a sigh, stayed somewhere behind my ribs. Harold didn't mention it again. He never did. He simply treated it as if nothing had happened. Linda, though, seemed to notice. She'd been working there for over 20 years, calm, steady, her face expressionless but her eyes sharp. That Monday morning, while we were arranging flowers in the viewing hall, she said quietly, "Don't stay after 10 again, Austin. It's not good to make them notice you." I wanted to ask who she meant by them, but something in her tone made me drop it. That afternoon she asked me to help her in the preparation room, a narrow space in the basement with metal tables, cabinets full of chemicals, and a faint smell of disinfectant that never really faded. On one wall hung a large, old mirror in a dark wooden frame. Its surface was cloudy, like it had seen too much. Linda noticed me looking at it. "Don't stare too long," she said. "Why?" "It's just a mirror." She kept her eyes on the table. "Not when there's a body in the room." I thought she was joking, but she wasn't smiling. Later, when she stepped out to make a call, I couldn't resist a quick glance. The reflection seemed normal, just the empty room, the metal tables, the pale light flickering from above. But when I moved closer, the image lagged, like a bad video feed. My reflection stood still half a second longer than I did. I stepped back, breath shallow. It went back to normal. When Linda returned, I didn't mention it. That evening we received a new arrival, a middle-aged man who'd died suddenly at home. Marcus wheeled the gurney into the prep room. As we unzipped the body bag, the lights flickered. A long hum came from the vents. Marcus muttered, "Not again." Linda told him to check the fuses upstairs. When he left, I noticed the mirror again. There was a faint handprint on it now, smudged and long, like someone had touched it from the inside. I wiped it with a cloth, but the print didn't fade. Then the reflection behind me changed. I saw movement, slow, deliberate, as if someone was standing just behind my right shoulder. But when I turned, no one was there. My throat tightened. I looked back at the mirror, and the shape was still there. A pale figure, out of focus, leaning slightly forward. The temperature dropped so fast my breath fogged. I backed away until my shoulder hit the cabinet. My hands were shaking. The reflection began to darken around the edges, like something was seeping into the glass. Then Linda burst back in. The moment she stepped through the door, the mirror cleared. The temperature rose. I could breathe again. She looked at me and then at the mirror. Her face turned completely white. "You looked into it, didn't you?" I couldn't answer. She walked over, covered the mirror with a white sheet, and whispered, "One of them noticed you." That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale outline standing behind me, just waiting for me to turn around. The next day, Harold called me into his office. His tone was calm, but I could tell he already knew. "Linda told me what happened," he said. "That mirror isn't for us. It's for them to see who's breaking the line." "What line?" I asked. "The one between our world and theirs." He opened a drawer and took out a small envelope. Inside was an old photograph, the same preparation room, decades earlier. In the picture, 3 people stood beside a covered body. And on the mirror behind them, faint but visible, was a 4th figure. A tall shape with no face. "One of my assistants took this in 1978, Harold said. He quit the next day. A month later, he was found dead in his apartment, every mirror in the place shattered." He looked at me, and for a long moment, Neither of us spoke. "I'm not asking you to believe," he finally said. "I'm asking you to respect the rules. Because disbelief doesn't protect you." I wanted to quit right then. But something about that photo, that house, the strange calm of Harold and Linda, it drew me in. I wanted to know what exactly we were protecting ourselves from. That night, long after everyone had gone home, I walked past the door to the prep room. The sheets still covered the mirror, but there was a small tear near the bottom. Through it, I saw the faintest flicker of movement, as if someone was standing inside the glass, waiting for me to look again. I didn't. I turned off the light and left the funeral home without looking back. But as I locked the door, I saw something that froze me completely. In the reflection of the glass window on the door, behind my shoulder, there was the faint outline of a figure standing in the dark hallway, motionless. When I turned, the hallway was empty. I drove home with my rearview mirror tilted down, afraid of what I might see looking back. By the third week, I had begun to understand why everyone at Hollow and Sons moved so quietly, spoke in half whispers, and avoided eye contact after dark. The silence in that place wasn't just part of the job, it was survival. Every creak, every shift of the building carried weight. The air itself felt watchful. I tried to keep busy and ignore the unease that had started to follow me even outside of work. At night, I sometimes caught myself checking the corners of my apartment, expecting to see a reflection where none should be. But work demanded focus, and the human mind has a way of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. That Thursday morning, a body was brought in, a man named Michael Roberts, mid-40s, a sudden heart attack. I was assigned to handle his paperwork and help Linda prepare the body. Routine work. But as I went through his clothing to log personal items, I found something small in the pocket of his jacket, a silver pendant on a thin chain, tarnished but still gleaming faintly. The initials MR were engraved on the back. "Put that with the rest of his things," Linda said, without even looking. I nodded, but when I turned to place it in the bag, I hesitated. The chain had a certain weight, almost warm to the touch, like it had been held recently. I slipped it into my pocket, telling myself I'd put it away later. The day passed as usual. The chapel smelled of lilies and wax. Harold spent most of the afternoon with a grieving family, while I cleaned the floors and tried not to think about the mirror downstairs. By evening, I'd forgotten about the pendant completely. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. The air in my apartment felt heavy, like the oxygen had been replaced with something thicker. I thought I heard a soft creak from the hallway, then the faint sound of someone whispering. At first, I couldn't make out the words, until I realized they were repeating my name, slowly, like a prayer. "Austin, give it back." The voice was calm, low, almost pleading. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned on the bedside lamp. The room was empty. But on my nightstand, beside my keys, lay the pendant. I could have sworn I left it in my jacket pocket. I picked it up and felt a pulse, a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. I dropped it instantly. It rolled to the edge of the table and stopped. I stared at it for a long time, afraid to touch it again. The next morning, I brought it back to work. The funeral service for Michael Roberts was scheduled for noon. I told Linda what had happened. She looked at me the way a nurse might look at a patient hiding symptoms. "You kept it?" she asked quietly. I was going to return it. She shook her head. "That's not how it works. You don't take anything from them. Ever. Even if it's by mistake." She took the pendant from me, placed it carefully on Michael's chest, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she turned to me. "They notice when you take what's theirs. Sometimes they just follow. Sometimes they remind you to return it. But sometimes," she didn't finish the sentence. The funeral went on without issue. The family cried softly, the priest murmured words I barely heard. For a moment, it felt like everything was finally normal. But that night, as I was leaving, Harold called me over. He handed me a small folder. Inside was a page from an old logbook, neat handwriting, dated 1983. It listed items found on a deceased person, and next to one entry, a note in red ink read, pendant missing. Returned 2 days later. Employee quit. Incident unresolved. Harold looked at me and said, "They always come back for what's theirs. It's not about value. It's about the connection. The moment you touched it, something linked to you." I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded. But later that evening, when I stepped out of the building, I caught my reflection in the window of the hearse. For a split second, there was another face beside mine, pale, expressionless, eyes closed. When I turned, no one was there. That night, sleep didn't come. Every shadow in my room felt alive, watching. Around 2:45, I heard footsteps in the hall outside my apartment. Slow, deliberate. I waited, heart racing, until they stopped right at my door. Then came 3 faint knocks. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. After a few seconds, something slid under the door, a small piece of paper. I waited until dawn to pick it up. On it, written in shaky handwriting, were 2 words. "Thank you." The next day, I went to work as if nothing had happened. Linda didn't ask questions. Harold didn't look surprised. And for the first time, the funeral home felt calm again, almost peaceful. But as I walked past the preparation room, I noticed the mirror, still covered by that white sheet. A new mark had appeared on the fabric, the shape of a hand, pressed from the inside. The next week began like any other, though something in the air at Hollow and Sons felt heavier, slower. The light from the tall front windows seemed dimmer, and the old clocks ticked just a little louder. Harold told us he had to leave town for 2 days, a family funeral in a nearby county. It would just be me, Linda, and Marcus until he returned. He handed me a short, handwritten note before he left. The paper looked yellowed, the edges soft with age. It read, "Do not extinguish the candles in the main hall, even if they go out by themselves. Do not leave any body uncovered." I wanted to ask what would happen if I broke the rule, but the words caught in my throat. Harold just nodded toward the note and said, "You'll understand why soon enough." Then he left. The first day went quietly. We handled 2 services, both small. By evening, Marcus went home, and Linda said she'd stay until midnight to help finish the arrangements for a morning ceremony. Around 11, she gave me a tired smile. "You'll lock up tonight. I'll see you in the morning." And she left. It was just me, alone in that old building. The silence after Linda's car drove away was different, thicker, somehow alive. The hallway lights hummed faintly. I could hear the soft crackle of candles in the viewing hall. I tried to keep busy, checking papers, rearranging chairs, avoiding the thought of being the only living person inside. At exactly 12:04, one of the candles in the hall went out. The flame didn't flicker or fade, it just died instantly, like a breath had been drawn right through it. I remembered Harold's rule, do not extinguish them, even if they go out by themselves. But it hadn't been me. The candle had gone out on its own. So did that mean I should relight it? I hesitated, standing in the doorway. The hall was long, the air colder than before. Shadows stretched farther than they should have. Finally, I took a lighter from my pocket and stepped inside. As I approached the candle, I noticed something else. One of the white sheets covering a body on the far table had slipped off, folded halfway down the torso. My first instinct was to fix it. That was part of the job, after all. I reached out to pull the fabric back over the body. The hand beneath the sheet moved. Just a small twitch, fingers curling, then relaxing. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. I waited, staring, praying I'd imagined it. The air around me felt charged, like static before a storm. Slowly, I backed away. The candle beside me flickered to life again on its own, the flame thin and trembling. Then came the sound. A slow shuffle from somewhere in the corridor behind me. One step. Then another. It wasn't the building settling. It was deliberate, the sound of someone walking, dragging their feet softly across the floor. I turned toward the noise, heart pounding, and saw movement near the end of the hallway, a shadow, tall and uneven, swaying like it couldn't keep balance. It paused under the light, and for a second, I saw a face, pale gray, eyes open but empty. I stumbled back into the hall and locked the door, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the keys. The steps grew louder outside, slow and heavy, stopping right at the door. I could hear a faint scraping sound, like nails or bone against wood. I don't remember how long I sat there, maybe minutes, maybe hours. Around 4 a.m., the noise stopped. When I finally gathered the courage to open the door, the corridor was empty again. The candles still burned, their flames perfectly still. I went to the table where the body lay. The sheet was neatly in place now, perfectly smooth, as if it had never slipped. Only one thing was different. On the edge of the fabric, near the chest, was a faint dark smudge, like a fingerprint made from ash. When morning came, Linda found me sitting on the floor of the main hall, exhausted and pale. She didn't look surprised. She just helped me stand up and said quietly, "You stayed through the night. That's more than most do." Later that day, I checked the security cameras. The footage from midnight to 4 a.m. was still there, though the screen kept freezing and skipping frames. Most of the time, nothing moved. But near the end, I saw something that made my skin crawl, the sheet lifting, the candles flickering, and the faint outline of a person walking across the hall, right behind where I'd been sitting. Only one problem: I was alone in the building that night. That evening, when Harold returned, I tried to tell him everything. He listened quietly, nodding, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he said, "That's why the rules exist. You were lucky, they didn't want you. They just wanted to remind you this is their place after dark." He handed the note back to me and said, "Keep it. You might need it again." I didn't ask what he meant. Some things were better left unknown. That night, when I left the funeral home, the wind was still, the air cold. As I locked the door, I saw my reflection in the glass, tired, pale, hollow-eyed. For a moment, a second reflection stood beside me, watching. When I blinked, it was gone. By the end of that month, Hollow and Sons no longer felt like a workplace, it felt like something living. The creak of the wooden floors, the low hum of the lights, even the air seemed to watch. I started waking up every night at the same time, 3:12 a.m. The silence in my apartment felt identical to the silence inside the funeral home, as if the two places had begun to overlap. I told myself I would quit. I planned to hand in my notice when Harold returned from another short trip. But the morning he came back, something about him looked different, more tired, as if he hadn't slept in days. He called me into his office before I even clocked in. "You've seen enough to understand why the rules exist," he said quietly. "But before you go, there's one more thing you should know." He reached into his drawer and handed me a sealed envelope. On the front, my name was written in his sharp, old-fashioned handwriting. "You'll open this when you leave," he said. "Not before." I wanted to ask what it was, but his tone made me stay silent. That evening, I decided it was my last shift. The sky outside was dark and wet with rain. Marcus had already gone home, and Linda was finishing up paperwork in the chapel. Around 9, she looked up at me and said, "You're thinking of leaving, aren't you?" I nodded. She sighed. "Then follow the rules one last time, Austin. That's all I'll say." By 10, she was gone too. The rain had turned into a slow, steady tapping against the windows. I was alone again, just like before. When the clock hit 10:30, I heard a sound from the preparation room, a soft thud, like something falling. I froze. My first instinct was to ignore it, but the noise came again. Against every rule, every warning, I went downstairs. The lights in the hallway flickered weakly. The smell of formaldehyde and wet earth mixed in the air. When I reached the prep room, the door was slightly open. Inside, one of the bodies lay uncovered, the sheet crumpled on the floor. I swallowed hard, stepped closer, and pulled the fabric up. But then I saw it, the same silver pendant I had once returned, lying on the dead man's chest. The initials MR glimmered faintly in the low light. That's when I noticed something else. On the wall, the white sheet covering the mirror had fallen. The glass was bare again. My reflection looked wrong. Pale, distant, slightly delayed, the way it had that night weeks ago. And behind my reflection, someone stood. A tall shadow, still, silent. I turned, nothing. When I looked back, the figure in the mirror was closer. My heart slammed against my ribs. I took a step back, but my reflection didn't move this time. It stayed where it was, staring straight at me. Then it smiled. I stumbled toward the door, fumbling for the handle. It wouldn't turn. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, the reflection wasn't just in the mirror anymore, it was behind me. I felt the air shift, colder, heavier. Something whispered in my ear, a voice I recognized from that first night. You shouldn't have stayed this long. The lights went out. When they came back on, I was lying on the floor of the prep room. The candles in the hall were all burning bright again, though I hadn't lit them. The mirror was covered, neatly, tightly, as if someone had placed the sheet back while I was unconscious. I grabbed my coat and left without looking back. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was pale gray, the kind of color that means dawn is coming soon. I sat in my car, hands shaking, and opened the envelope Harold had given me. Inside was a single photograph, me, standing in the preparation room, looking into the mirror. But the reflection wasn't mine. The man in the glass was wearing my clothes, but his eyes were dark and hollow, his mouth slightly open as if whispering. Underneath the photo, a short note. You broke the line. They see you now. I drove until the funeral home disappeared in the rearview mirror. For hours, I didn't stop, didn't think. I just needed to be far away. Weeks later, I rented a small apartment 2 towns over. No one there knew me. I avoided mirrors, covered every reflective surface I could. It helped for a while, until the first night I heard it again. 3 knocks on the door. Slow. Precise. Then silence. When I finally looked through the peephole, the hallway outside was empty. But in the narrow strip of glass on the opposite wall, I saw movement, a figure standing just behind my reflection, waiting. Now, every night, I hear those knocks around the same time, 3:12 a.m. I don't open the door. I don't answer. I just sit there, listening, praying that if I stay silent long enough, they'll forget I ever saw them. But deep down, I know they won't. Because the last rule Harold never said out loud was the one that mattered most. Once they see you, you never stop seeing them.